27 astronauts via the Apollo program's mighty Saturn V rockets left Earth for the moon, 250,000 miles away. Except for those few who serviced the Hubble Space Telescope and some SpaceX tourist missions, the remaining 500 astronauts who have orbited Earth did not ascend much higher than about 250 miles above sea level, a distance slightly farther than from Paris to London, or from Islamabad to Kabul, or from Kyoto to Tokyo, or from Cairo to Jerusalem, or from Seoul to Pyongyang. If you're a geographically challenged American, then it's slightly farther than from New York City to Washington, D.C. Next time you hold a schoolroom globe of Earth in your hand, have a look at the distances between any of these pairs of cities. They sit about a centimeter from each other, which means what we've been calling space travel all these years has been astronauts orbiting 1 centimeter above a schoolroom globe, boldly going where hundreds have gone before, at a distance you can drive in less than 4 hours if you headed straight up and obeyed terrestrial speed limits. My low Earth orbit smackdown notwithstanding, ascending even those modest distances can offer enlightening perspectives. When not viewed through binoculars or high-resolution cameras, very little of human civilization is recognizable from orbit. Yes, the lights of cities at night can be striking from above, although not much more striking than from an airplane. No, you won't see the Great Wall of China, nor the U.S. interstate system, itself wider than the Great Wall. And you will just barely make out the Hoover Dam and the Great Pyramid in Egypt. The resolution of the human eye-brain combination is about 1 arc-minute. The highly touted Apple Retina display was their successful attempt to create pixels smaller than your eye can resolve, smaller than 1 arc-minute in your field of view, at the typical distance you would use the display. With that resolution, the eye-brain system sees no pixels, bringing unprecedented clarity and sharpness to images. With 20/20 vision, that's equivalent to the size of a walnut across the length of a football field. The Hubble telescope, which has better than 20/20 vision, and which has military versions of itself looking downward instead of upward, can resolve a walnut at a distance of 100 miles. With only 1 or 2 human-made structures visible from Earth orbit, everything else that divides us, national borders, politics, languages, skin color, who you worship, is invisible to you. The color-coded countries painted on our maps offer stark reminders of who is not us, thus helping to identify our allies as well as our enemies. Astronaut Mike Massimino, an engineer whose space shuttle missions included surfacing the Hubble Space Telescope, writes poignantly in his memoir about viewing Earth from space. The thought that went through my mind when I spacewalked and looked down on Earth was that this must be the view from heaven. Then it was replaced by another thought. No, this is what heaven must look like. Mike gets misty-eyed every time he shares that experience. He went a little higher than the International Space Station. The Hubble orbits 340 miles up, which took him to 1.3 centimeters, half an inch above the schoolroom globe. Mike was nonetheless far enough away for Earth to reveal itself through the lens of the universe and not the lens of geopolitics. The overview effect in full force. How many on Earth, among those who are oppressed or at war with their neighbors or who hunger for food, would possibly think of Earth itself as heaven? Gaining that on-orbit perspective and returning to Earth changes your relationship with our planet and with your fellow humans. Turns out, 2 regions of the world exist where you can indeed identify a national border from space, as if map makers drew it themselves. In one area, fields of green, and on the other side of a sharp boundary, brown desert. In another area, the nighttime landscape is ablaze with city lights, yet across a sharp boundary, the depths of darkness. This can happen naturally at a mountain range or some other extensive natural barrier, but not here. These boundaries are sharp and thin. They reveal unevenly shared resources across borders, where one side controls their landscape, while the other side does not. What's going on? The irrigated desert borders are in the Middle East, between Israel and the Gaza Strip, and between Israel and large swaths of the West Bank, regions of ceaseless political tension. The GDP per capita of Israel is 12 times larger than that of Palestine. The light-dark border is in East Asia, between South Korea, Republic of Korea, and North Korea, Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The GDP per capita of South Korea is 25 times larger than that of North Korea, another region of persistent political tension. Such stark visual differences from above need not be national boundaries of disparate geopolitics. They can also delineate areas of subjugation. In 1992, during my first of several visits to South Africa, 2 years before Nelson Mandela was elected president, I flew into Johannesburg at night and noticed on the long approach to the city a large ground area with sharp boundaries and no interior lights. It was clearly a lake. That's what lakes look like from an airplane at night. Returning home a week later, flying back out in the daytime with the ground fully illuminated, what I had seen was no lake. It was the larger part of Soweto, an all-black shantytown of Johannesburg, with no electricity, no lighting at night or at any other time of day, no appliances, no refrigerators. I can know all this intellectually for having read about it, but when I confront it from above, with details stripped away, I don't see the politics, the history, the skin colors, the languages, the bigotry, the racism, the protests. I'm instead plagued by a simpler thought that, as a species, we might not possess the maturity or wisdom the future requires to assure the survival of civilization. Let's ascend some more. In fact, let's go all the way to the moon. Here's a quip shared occasionally among space enthusiasts. If God wanted us to have a space program, he would have given Earth a moon. An invertedly insightful comment on what drives space exploration. Note that Venus, our nearest planetary neighbor, has no moon at all. Mars, our next nearest neighbor, has Phobos and Deimos, two sorry excuses for moons. Both are Idaho potato-shaped and tiny enough to fit easily within the municipal borders of most cities. Our moon, on the other hand, is 50% larger than Pluto and checks in as the 5th largest in the solar system. So Earth did well in the moon lottery, endowed with a destination of dreams for intrepid explorers. If the Space Shuttle and the International Space Station orbit between 1 and 1.3 centimeters above the schoolroom globe, find the moon in the next classroom, 10 meters away. That's why it takes only 8 minutes for a rocket to reach Earth orbit, but a full 3 days for the Apollo rockets to reach the moon. The seminal photo of planet Earth rising over the lunar landscape, you know the one, arrived in December 1968 from Apollo 8, the first mission ever to leave home for another destination. From deep space, the entire Earth is laid bare, as the cosmos intends you to see it, a fragile juxtaposition of land, oceans, and clouds, isolated and adrift in the void of space, with no hint of anybody or anything coming to rescue us from ourselves. This outlook ascends a few realms higher than the overview effect and represents the true beginnings of a cosmic perspective. Earth in the lunar sky is nearly 14 times larger than the moon in Earth's sky. Earth is also 2.5 times more reflective than the moon, although the exact value from moment to moment varies with cloud cover. So full Earth, viewed from the moon, is about 35 times brighter than full moon viewed from Earth. Unlike what's implied by NASA's Earthrise photo, snapped from the orbiting Apollo 8 command module, Earth neither rises nor sets on the moon. Viewed from the moon's near side, Earth never leaves the sky. From the moon's far side, you might never know Earth existed at all. Apollo 8 did not land on the moon, which left them forgotten in the shadow of Apollo 11's Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. Instead, Apollo 8 just orbited the moon 10 times before returning. Yet no one had seen Earth so distant before. Their mission from launch to splashdown lasted from December 21st to December 27th, which closed out the bloodiest year of the most turbulent decade in the U.S. since the Civil War a century earlier. During the Vietnam War, more Americans and Vietnamese died in 1968 than in any other year. A year that included the Tet Offensive in February and the infamous My Lai Massacre in March. Back home, now add the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. in April and Bobby Kennedy in June, followed by the persistent violent protests in cities and on college campuses. Some say Apollo 8 saved 1968. I prefer to say Apollo 8 salvaged it. Notice that Apollo 8's journey enclosed the Christmas holiday. On Christmas Eve, while still in orbit around the moon, the 3 astronauts, Bill Anders, James Lovell, and Frank Borman, took turns reading the first 10 verses of the Book of Genesis from the King James Version of the Bible. You may be familiar with some, if not all, these lines. Anders began, "We are now approaching lunar sunrise, and for all the people back on Earth, the crew of Apollo 8 has a message that we would like to send to you. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth was without form and void. And darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, and God said, 'Let there be light.' And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness." Lovell continued, "And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. And God said, 'Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters.' And God made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so. And God called the firmament heaven. And the evening and the morning were the second day." Borman finished, "And God said, 'Let the waters under the heaven be gathered together unto one place, and let the dry land appear.' And it was so. And God called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called the seas. And God saw that it was good." And from the crew of Apollo 8, we close with good night, good luck, a Merry Christmas, and God bless all of you on the good earth. The Cosmic Perspective can do that to you, especially if you are religious. Back on Earth, in response to this biblical reading beamed from the moon, noted atheist Madalyn Murray O'Hair, founder of the ardent organization American Atheists, sued the federal government, accusing it of violating the First Amendment, the part that says, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion." The suit was dismissed from all levels of court to which it was taken. With no legal expertise, I cannot comment on the legitimacy of her lawsuit, but I have thoughts on the existence of the lawsuit itself. At the time, I was only 10 years old, but had the me of today met the Madalyn of then, here's how that conversation would have gone down. Neil, were you strapped to a Saturn V rocket with 9 million pounds of thrust and sent 250,000 miles away into deep space to witness Earthrise from lunar orbit on Christmas Eve? Madalyn, no. Neil, then shut the fuck up. In that first of 9 missions, our goal was to explore the moon. But while doing so, we looked back over our shoulders and discovered Earth for the first time. After the Earthrise photo made its rounds, people changed. Earth, the planet, mattered as never before. If your local river or lake got polluted by factory effluences, you would get angry and try to do something about it. But thinking about all of Earth as a holistic ecosystem and not just your section of it had not yet become a priority or even a thought. In the U.S., important seeds have been planted as early as 1872, with the congressional designation of Wyoming's Yellowstone as the first national park, followed by President Teddy Roosevelt's 1906 Antiquities Act to preserve natural and otherwise historic monuments, and by President Woodrow Wilson's National Park Service in 1916. Now, fast forward to the 1962 publication of marine biologist Rachel Carson's best-selling Silent Spring, itself a wake-up call to the consequences of rampant pesticide use in agriculture, especially the environmental impact of dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane, commonly and sensibly abbreviated as DDT. The book's content and success prompted President John Kennedy to ask his Science Advisory Committee to study the problem. And in early 1969, the U.S. experienced a nasty oil spill with up to 16,000 cubic meters of crude oil polluting the waters and beaches of wealthy Santa Barbara County in California. By 1970, we were poised and positioned to save the planet. The full spate of 9 Apollo lunar missions spanned December 1968 through December 1972. Over that time, we were still fighting the Cold War with the Soviet Union and a hot war in Vietnam. Campus unrest continued, culminating in the 1970 Kent State University shootings, in which unarmed anti-war protesters were gunned down by the Ohio National Guard, who wounded 9 and killed 4. The United States clearly had pressing problems to solve, yet we paused to reflect on our relationship to Earth. What follows is a list of actions unprecedented in their rapidity, their scope, and their mission, all occurring between 1968 and 1973. Well before corresponding legislation would be passed in other industrialized nations of the world. Apollo 11, first to walk on the moon, 1969. Comprehensive Clean Air Act, 1970. Earlier versions, 1963, 1967. First National Earth Day, 1970. National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration formed, 1970. Whole Earth Catalog published, 1968 through 1972, sporadically thereafter. Environmental Protection Agency formed, 1970. Crying Indian Public Service TV commercial, 1971. Doctors Without Borders founded, Paris, 1971. DDT banned, 1972. Clean Water Act, 1972. Apollo 17, last mission to the moon, 1972. Endangered Species Act, 1973. Earlier versions, 1966, 1969. First catalytic converter for cars, 1973. First unleaded gasoline emission standards, 1973. A few notes. The Crying Indian was an emotional appeal to not throw trash out your car window and became one of the most recognized public service announcements of the era. Even though the actor, dressed in Native American garb while shedding a tear, was actually of Italian descent. I include the founding of the humanitarian organization Doctors Without Borders on the supposition that without a view of Earth from space, the very concept of without borders might not have arisen. Instead, perhaps referencing international doctors or doctors crossing borders. Just a thought. Also, the official Earth Day history page makes no mention of Apollo or images of Earth from space, simply declaring that Rachel Carson's 1962 book was what primed the pumps for the 1970 inaugural celebration of Earth. Meanwhile, images of Earth from space became the endearing and enduring symbol of the whole Earth catalog, and an unofficial flag for Earth Day, displaying Apollo 17's image of full Earth taken on their return from the moon in December 1972. One can never know for sure the subtle or not so subtle causes and effects of human actions. In my understandably biased view, the I Care About Earth movement could have in principle happened in 1950 or 1960. The environment was no less a problem then. For example, air pollution in the Los Angeles basin from the rise of cars combined with unfortunate thermal inversions due to local geography made LA during the 1940s and 50s one of the most polluted cities on Earth. Or it could have happened while Rachel Carson's book was still on the New York Times bestseller list, where it lived for 31 weeks from 1962 to 1963. That would have been ideal, but Kennedy was assassinated in 1963, and Carson, sadly, died of cancer in 1964. Between 1963 and 1969, a total of 4 governmental reports spanning 3 presidents would be filed, each exploring the effects of pesticides on crops and human health, and each calling for the phase-out of DDT. Still, no legislative action over that time. Before the 1969 Santa Barbara oil spill, 2 others occurred from December 1962 to January 1963, affecting the Mississippi and Minnesota riverbanks. Still, we were all distracted by other things. Mass environmental awareness could have waited until 1975, after the end of the Vietnam War, or until 1990, after the fall of the Berlin Wall. No, it all happened smack in the middle of our Apollo missions to the moon, while a starry message was gently descending from space, infusing us all with a veritable firmware upgrade of our collective capacity to care. Apart from serving as our first destination in space, the moon enjoys extraordinary value across world cultures. The cycle of lunar phases informs the reckoning of time for the Chinese, Islamic, and the Hebrew calendars. Also, full moons rise at sunset and set at sunrise, and the physics of reflectivity makes them 6 times brighter than half moons, so they provide an excellent guiding light throughout the night. The moon also feeds our superstitions, believed by some to exert mysterious powers of influence on human behavior, especially during full moon. The art of asking questions represents an important dimension of science literacy. How you think and how you query nature matter more than what you know. Often the answers reveal themselves simply by asking the right questions in the right sequence. Everyone knows the full moon turns some of us into werewolves. But how come it doesn't happen when you're in the basement, or if there's a complete overcast? Just because you can't see the full moon through the clouds doesn't mean the moon isn't there. So it must be the light that temporarily converts your genetic profile to that of a wild canine. Holding aside the biological and physiological implausibility of this claim, did you know that moonlight is just reflected sunlight? Obtain a spectrum of the moon's light, and it's identical to that of the sun. A fact I demonstrated for my 8th grade science fair project using a spectroscope I had built from scratch. Came in 2nd place. If the moon turns you into a werewolf at night, then so should the sun in the daytime. Some hold the opinion that more babies are born under the full moon than any other phase. It so happens there's no statistical evidence to support this claim, only anecdotal. And the full moon exerts no extra gravity on Earth or on us relative to its other phases. Let's pretend we're unaware of these salient facts. For now, we're just asking questions. Was the delivery table facing the full moon in the sky when the baby was born? If so, maybe the moon helped yank the baby from the womb. Presumably, delivery tables orient randomly across all hospital delivery rooms. We then expect some of these tables to face opposite the full moon during delivery. In those cases, any extra moon gravity would now pull the opposite direction, keeping the baby in its mother's womb and delaying the birth, not speeding it up. If not gravity, then perhaps some mysterious other force was operating. How about something the methods and tools of science have yet to discover? New science is always fun, and typically leads to Nobel Prizes all around. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We're still just asking questions. How long is the human gestation period? Doctors will tell you 280 days, 40 weeks, which is not entirely true. That's the count of days from the last menstrual cycle. Hardly anybody gets pregnant then. You probably got pregnant when you ovulated 2 weeks later. So the actual time to make a full-term human baby comes to 280 days minus 14 days, which equals 266 days. Now let's ask about the time it takes for the moon to cycle through its phases. Full moon to full moon. You can look that up. It averages 29.53 days. 9 of these cycles comes to 266 days. That's interesting. A full-term baby takes about 9 cycles of the moon to develop in the womb. So, to be born under a full moon, romantic as it is, simply means you were likely conceived under one, romantic as it was. No need to appeal to new physics or mysterious forces or supernatural events to explain the non-result. Rational inquiry took you there. The moon affects the waters of Earth, with especially high oceanic tides during full moon. Biologists tell us we are mostly water, as are the oceans. Surely then, the full moon's tidal forces affect us in some way, if not to turn us into lunatics. In the Earth-Moon system, the side of Earth facing the moon is closer, so it feels a slightly stronger force of gravity than the side facing away. This creates a stretching force across Earth's diameter, most visible in our oceanic tides, but the solid Earth experiences it too. Notice that this description of moon tides on Earth makes no mention of the moon's phase. That's because the strength of the moon's tides has nothing to do with the moon's phase. Full moons get the highest tides not because of the moon, but because of the sun. The sun's tides on Earth are about 1/3 the strength of the moon's tides, yet hardly anybody talks about them. During full moon, high sun tides add directly to high moon tides, giving the false impression that the full moon imparts extra gravitational influence. Furthermore, whatever false gravitational influence you ascribe to the full moon, you must also grant to the new moon, because the sun's tides perfectly align there too. Another way to think about it: how does the moon's tidal force across the diameter of your head compare with the moon's tidal force across the diameter of Earth? Like Earth, at any moment, there is one side of your head closest to the moon, feeling stronger gravity than the other side. Now imagine that your noggin was just a 7-inch sphere of ocean water. How much distortion can we expect from the moon's tidal forces? When you do the math, you get about 1/10,000th of a millimeter. That's substantially less than the distortion on your skull from the weight of your own 10-pound head on itself as you sleep on pillows at night. Yet nobody writes lycanthropic stories about what brand of pillows you use or how wide your head might be. If that bedtime example is too abstract, just imagine sticking your head in a vise and having your friend tighten it to a force of 10 pounds every night. One of the rewards for doing well in the moon lottery is that the sun is 400 times wider than the moon, and it happens to be 400 times farther away. This pure coincidence renders the sun and moon about the same size in the sky, allowing for spectacular solar eclipses. This wasn't always the case, nor will it be so in the distant future. The moon is spiraling away from Earth at a rate of about 1.5 inches per year. So let's enjoy this match made in heaven while we can. Every few years, the moon passes exactly between Earth and the sun, precisely covering the sun, darkening the sky, and briefly laying bare the sun's gorgeous outer atmosphere, called the corona. No other planet-moon combination in the solar system can match it. Eclipses lead a long list of sky phenomena that irresistibly attract and entangle us. The idea that the sun, moon, planets, and stars affect us personally is called astrology and goes way back. Some call it the second oldest profession. How could any of us think any different as we watch the sky revolve around us daily? For example, certain constellations rise before dawn every autumn, just when your crops are ready for harvest. Clear evidence that the entire dome of the sky, day and night, lovingly looks after your needs and wants. With this mindset, the sky also portends events you, your culture, or your religion might either desire or dread. Some years ago, I received a phone call at my Hayden Planetarium office from a woman who was rummaging through her deceased father's personal effects, which included a diary from one of her distant ancestors, a settler in New England, who described his family's migration via covered wagon to a new home. The diary fretfully describes a rapid darkening of the skies in midday. The patriarch of the family was deeply concerned that, without warning, the sixth seal had been opened, and a biblical prophecy from the book of Revelation was underway. I looked when he opened the sixth seal, and the sun became black as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became like blood. He stopped the wagon and prompted his entire family to kneel, pray, repent, and ready themselves to meet their Maker. The caller to my office wondered if her ancestor had unknowingly described a total solar eclipse. I asked for the date of the diary entry. She wasn't sure, but knew the trip was in the early 1800s. From specialized software I keep just for emergencies such as this, I localized the moment to midday, June 16th, 1806, and affirmed they were in Massachusetts. In the early 19th century, total solar eclipses were fully understood by any mildly educated person who witnessed them. So the only way the event could be misinterpreted is if the wagon's location was under total cloud cover. Now combine an inexplicably darkened sky with a deeply religious, Bible-fluent Christian, and you are pleading for God's mercy. Without the clouds, the solar eclipse becomes an educational spectacle for the whole family. 27 years later, in the pre-dawn hours of November 13th, 1833, the annual Leonid meteor shower was particularly memorable. Visible across all of North America, it delivered upwards of 100,000 falling stars per hour. That's as many as 30 per second. For comparison, a good meteor shower might average 1 per minute. So this was a shocking display. We call meteor showers this intense meteor storms, which result from Earth plowing through a denser-than-normal pocket of cometary debris as we orbit the Sun. The bits of comet Tempel-Tuttle that comprise the Leonids are no larger than peas, but on colliding with Earth's atmosphere at 160,000 miles per hour, they burn up as streaks of light, visible in darkened skies. At the time, future President Abraham Lincoln, then 24 years old, lived in Illinois as a boarder with a deacon of the local Presbyterian church. Upon witnessing this unforgettable cosmic display, the deacon swiftly aroused Lincoln, declaring, "Arise, Abraham, the day of judgment has come." A conclusion drawn from yet another, the very next apocalyptic verse in the book of Revelation. "And the stars of heaven fell unto the earth, even as a fig tree casteth her untimely figs, when she is shaken of a mighty wind." Honest Abe, a self-educated, lifelong learner, dutifully went outside to look up at the night sky. Invoking his knowledge of astronomy, he noticed that all the grand constellations were still there, intact. Ursa Major, Leo, Taurus, Orion. Whatever was falling, it wasn't the stars. And so he rationally concluded that a biblical prophecy of doom was not underway, and promptly went back to bed. Knowledge of the universe, cosmic perspectives in particular, simultaneously disconnects our ego from all that happens in the sky. yet fosters accountability for all we do, preventing us from either crediting or blaming the sky for our earthly affairs. In other words, from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, 1509, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves." In 1994, Carl Sagan published Pale Blue Dot, a vision of the human future in space, inspired by a 1990 photo of Earth taken by the Voyager 1 space probe after crossing the orbit of Neptune. That moment was chosen as an external visitor's first encounter with our solar system's planets, coming the other way. Earth occupies barely a pixel in that image, offering a stark reminder of how small we are in the universe. In his book, Carl waxes poetic about how frail and precious Earth appears when seen as a pale blue dot. That image comes closest to a next-generation reset of our societal mission statement, even if it falls shy of having the impact of the Earthrise photo. In any case, one might think of it as Earth's first selfie. Other cosmic revelations that could rival Earthrise include the discovery that we are not alone in the universe. This could signal a change in the human condition that we cannot foresee or imagine. Taken to enticing yet frightening limits, we might exist in a computer simulation programmed by intelligent juvenile aliens still living in their parents' basement. Or we might discover that planet Earth is a zoo, a literal terrarium aquarium constructed for the amusement of alien anthropologists. Going even further, perhaps our cosmos, complete with our 100 billion stars per galaxy and the 100 billion galaxies in the observable universe, is nothing more than a snow globe on some alien creature's mantle. In all these scenarios, the cosmic perspective will have morphed from the universe reminding us to take better care of our own fate